Center Talk Radio. You're in to all things music.
I had never really like played with bands before. I mean, I couldn't play. I mean, I didn't have any practical experience. And he basically just, said, you're terrible. You're never going to go anywhere. You suck. And
Frosty said
yeah. Well, not in so many words, but just, more, the implication was there. And it was this thing, I worked, I mean, it drove me to, and I'll never forget, I was playing just some gig around town in some band I was in, and he showed up and basically said, well, I never would have thought you'd get to where you could play well, you know.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Guys in Heaven. Yeah. Is that the name of that song?
Meet You in Heaven.
Meet You in Heaven. Yeah. Wow. Jimmy Abegg, huh? Yeah. Welcome, folks. It's Tuesday again, and here we are on Intersect Radio. That tune we just heard features the drumming of my guest today, one Mr. Michael Radovsky. Mike's drummer here in Nashville. Doing all sorts of stuff. We hang out kind of regularly together, and have coffee, and sometimes we get the practice pads out and watch videos, and he kicks my butt with his molar technique and all his stuff, and I have to come home and practice harder. But it's all good. It's motivational. So, folks, without further ado, here's my guest, Mr. Michael Radovsky. How you doing, Mike?
Great to be here.
It's great to have you here.
It's fun. I've been in this dungeon before and never doing this, but it feels right.
Yeah, it is kind of dungeony, isn't it?
But that's.
But it's not humid or anything.
No,
damp.
Dungeon in a good way.
Yeah.
That's where drums should be practiced,
right.
Like a little cave.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. So, Mike, tell us about yourself. There's a lot of things you're going to tell us today that even I don't know.
Oh.
And I'm waiting to hear it. Let's start from the beginning. The very beginning. In Ohio?
Toledo, Ohio. A basically non-musical family, but I had an older sister who, for whatever reason, she would buy the first, seminal bands. She would buy their first record, whether it was Zeppelin or Janis Joplin, Procol Harum, whoever. She would listen to hip stuff. I mean, I was 5th grade, 6th. I mean, and she would have the stuff, and I just immediately liked it. But I didn't play. I didn't really play drums till much later.
You just liked the music.
Yeah, I just loved music, and I liked all kinds of. I liked different things. Mm-hmm. But she would just, it was just kind of an osmosis thing of she would buy these great records. So it was, she didn't buy I don't know, this is going to sound weird if I say it, but she didn't buy the usual AM radio sort of pop stuff. She
bought the B-sides.
Even weirder.
Weirder.
Just more, and then I just kind of took it from there. The first record I paid for with my own money was Wheels of Fire. Cream.
Cream.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Had you heard that on the radio?
No, she had bought Fresh Cream, again, their first record.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she bought the second one too, Disraeli Gear. So I just figured, and back in those days, you'd just sort of, if the cover was cool, you'd buy the record.
Right.
So, and I sort of gravitated towards, I liked English bands.
Mm-hmm.
I liked, The Who, I liked Cream, and Hendrix, obviously American, but just had to go to England to, come back here.
Right.
So I that's the stuff I really liked.
Huh. So when were you motivated to play the drums, and what motivated you?
Well, I started, kind of fooling around on guitar, and then I had a weird little accident where I wasn't good or anything by that point, but I cut off basically the end of my left hand index finger, and they attached it, but it's just kind of like a stiff, that the last joint doesn't work. So that kind of like put a hamper on guitar playing. And I just, when I was like, I want to say 18 or 19, I got some drums and kind of fooled around with them, but it was just sort of more of a hobby. And I moved to Boston to go to college. I was a history major at BU, but I thought I was interested in drums and thought I might want to do it. So I kind of started taking lessons, and that's when I got serious.
Who did you take lessons from?
The two main guys I took from, one was, and I think he's sort of lost in kind of recent jazz drumming history, but it was a guy that was teaching at Berkeley, named Keith Copeland.
Mm-hmm.
He played with like Johnny Griffin, and he had really good jazz credentials. Yeah, and just basics, like rudiments. He had studied with Alan Dawson, and Alan, at least for Boston, now it's become sort of global, came out with these systems that certainly everybody in Boston used to teach, like using stick control and syncopation. And but Keith sort of added to it one of the Wilcoxon books, so he would kind of have you do that at the same time. So him, and that's when I was still in college, and I was learning, and then when I got out of college, and the first bands I was in were around then, and that's when I was like really, started practicing a lot. And at that time, a lot of the drummers that went on to become like, the big deal drummers that we know about, like, Vinnie Colaiuta and Steve Smith and John Robinson, Casey Sherrill, they were all just guys that were, playing around Boston. So I would go see them, and it was, I was young enough that it wasn't, it was inspiring.
Instead of intimidating.
Yeah. I mean, it was intimidating to be sure, but it was still like, hey, I could do that. You know? So,
well, it's funny you should mention Keith Copeland, because I was asking about him week before last. Bill Pierce?
I don't know him, but I know who he was playing with all kinds of bands in Boston.
Yeah. Bill went on to have a great career. He played with Art Blakey and
Tony Williams. Yeah.
And he and Keith were really good friends. So I sent him a message and said, man, I haven't heard about Keith in a long time. Where is he? He passed.
Yeah.
Some time ago.
I didn't want to say it because I wasn't 100% sure, but I think I had heard that he passed.
I think he passed in Germany somewhere.
Yeah. He went the way of the jazz guys become expatriates and go somewhere where they like jazz.
I think he was
more.
Teaching at some university in Germany.
But he was really good for the fundamentals. And then when I started playing in bands and, was getting to where I could play, I studied with a guy named Bob Gulati, who he's not, for as great as he is, he's not really well known outside of Boston. He teaches at Berkeley now, but for years and years, he had a really huge and successful teaching practice out of his home. Like he just had like a zillion students, but he was great. I mean, he really kicked my butt. I mean, it was all, I mean, I had to practice like 5-6 hours a day just to prepare, because he was one of those guys where he had like a waiting list to get in with him. Mm-hmm. And if you showed up to his house and you weren't prepared, you'd kind of get the look. And and then the next time, it wasn't even the look anymore. It would be like, well, I got like 5 other guys that want your slot. Mm-hmm. Do you want to do this or not? Yeah. There was no screwing around. Yeah. And the thing that was funny for me, because I didn't really study with anybody till, I don't want to say like an adult, but I wasn't like a little kid. And at the different times in my life when I've taught, that's how I learned. And when I would teach kids, I would certainly dial it back to not where they had to, practice for like 6 hours a day, but I gave them what I thought was a reasonable amount, and they might come back, the next 5 weeks, and you're still like working on the first lesson. And I just, mm-hmm. I didn't get it. It was just, it just didn't make any sense to me, because that's what it was. Just learning there was probably the best place I could have learned, just mm-hmm. because there were so many good players. And if you studied with somebody that was good, that's what they did. It wasn't like babysitting. It was like serious stuff. Yeah. And plus there's a guy, I know I've told you about him because I wasn't sure if you knew him, but there was a guy that I lived with for about a year. We like shared a house, and he was one of the drummers in town. He was the one that everybody thought was going to be the guy. Hmm. I mean, he was, best pals with Vinny, who everybody called Vince back then, but now it's Vinny. But it was Vince and Steve. All those guys knew each other. And his name was Frosty Paget, or is, we actually emailed a little bit this morning.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Where is he?
Lives in Boston.
Still.
Yep. But he was the guy that could play with singers. Like the rap on Vinny was like, well, he plays too much, and Steve Smith like played too loud. And they had all played with the same people in the same bands, guys like Neil Steubenhaus, just all guys that you would know, Tim Landers, mm-hmm. Mike Stern, Philippe Sace, all those guys, that went on to have like amazing careers. But he was the one that everybody thought was gonna. So it just, to you kids out there, you just never know. Right. Things just go another way.
What's he doing now, Frosty?
He teaches and plays gigs around town. But
was he playing with jazz singers or just singers?
No, they were. I mean, he could play jazz. His thing was his modeling guys were Tony, and for like R&B, like he personally, even at that time, this is like in the 70s, owned over 50 records that Harvey Mason played on.
Oh, really?
And I'll never forget, I remember I saw he used to play with this band. I'm trying to think of the name of it. They were just one of the really good, local cover, they were like all these cover bands that played, funk music. Mm-hmm. And he was playing at one of the clubs that we all went to. And Harvey Mason's brother, Kenny, was there. He was a trumpet player. And in between sets, he goes up to Frosty and said, "Man, do you listen to Harvey Mason?" So that was he just had more sensitivity when it came to like vocal music, mm-hmm. But he had chops. I mean, he could just he was amazing. And basically the whole reason I brought it up, I know I'm kind of jumping around a lot, was when he lived with me. This was kind of before I was into that 5-6 hours a day practicing, and I had never really like played with bands before. I mean, I couldn't play. I mean, I didn't have any practical experience. And he basically just, said, you're terrible. You're never going to go anywhere. You suck. And
Frosty said
Yeah, yeah. Well, not in so many words, but just, more, the implication was there. And it was this thing, I worked, it drove me to, and I'll never forget, I was playing just some gig around town in some band I was in, and he showed up and basically said, well, I never would have thought you'd get to where you could play well, know.
Where did you play in Boston?
Every club that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
You know some of these, right?
Uh-huh.
I'd play Bunratty's,
Yeah.
Jonathan Swift's, Jack's, In Square Men's Bar, The Channel, Tam O'Shanter.
What was the club on the corner right after you get into Cambridge?
The one that's downstairs?
Pooh's Pub?
No, Pooh's Pub was near Fenway Park.
Yeah.
I never played Pooh's because that's where Pooh's Pub was where all the elite of the guys that would go on to be like fusion giants all play there. Like Tommy Campbell sort of had almost like a residency there.
Yeah. I played Pooh's, but I didn't go on to be in the elite fusion.
Oh,
player.
well, but
I got.
But you know what I'm saying, though.
Yeah, I got a great. I think it's a pretty good story about Pooh's Pub. I had just gotten this white Gretsch kit.
Oh, yeah, that's what Frosty used to play. That was the thing.
Yeah, and so I take it down to Pooh's Pub, and I'm doing this gig, and Vinny Caliuta comes in because I'm playing with Tim Landers.
So was this the Alston? No, this wasn't the Alston Funk Band.
No, this is just a band,
Sorry, everybody. This is real inside baseball Boston stuff.
Yeah. And so Tim Landers and Vinny are really good friends.
Oh, yeah. They were the team.
Yeah. And so Vinny wants to sit in. We all kind of go, okay, because he's playing with Alice Cooper.
No, Al Cooper.
Al Cooper.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
It's okay.
And he comes in. He's off the road for.
And that was like his first big
gig. Yeah. And he gets on my drum kit, man, and pretty much destroys it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's hitting so hard. I'm thinking my drum kit's gonna fall apart.
Yeah. The thing I remember about him back then, and this is another weird, just the way things go. One of the houses I lived in when I was going to college, there was 9 other guys lived in this house. 1 bathroom. It was a big house, but for whatever reason, there was 1 bathroom, 9 guys. And for 6 months or so, he lived with us, kind of for nothing. He had that thing of he was so good, he could sort of get away with stuff that wacky, So he lived with us, didn't pay anything for 6 months. But when he would get on a kit of a set of drums, it's even in my limited knowledge, I went, this is the best drummer I've ever seen, number one. And number two, he just played like it's the last time he would ever get to play.
Mm-hmm.
It was always on 11,
Mm-hmm.
He just, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. But, he
well, he was maybe making a
finesse.
point.
Yeah. He has a lot of finesse now,
Yeah.
and so, but none of that then, man. It was just full steam ahead,
Well, he had finesse, I think, but he was maybe just trying to give you the business.
Right.
Because he was very competitive.
Yeah. Tear up my drum kit for sure.
Well, that's
So did you do any Martha's Vineyards things?
I think I only played a couple of gigs, and I would fill in. I remember the times that I played Martha's Vineyards. It was with, weirdly enough, in Boston, there was quite a healthy country music scene. And there was I can't remember the guy that I played with. I was just filling in for another drummer. And her name, actually, she was really good. It was one of the first girl drummers that I ever met, and she was could really play. She was not saying that girls can't play. She was just the first one I'd ever met. She was great. Her name was Kathy Berkeley, and she actually lived here in Nashville for a while, and then just moved back, I guess. But I was just subbing for her they would hire me to, when she had a conflict or something, I would play with her band on Martha's Vineyard. But I can't remember which guy it was. There was like a scene.
Was it like a Sunday afternoon country?
I don't know. I can't remember.
I used to play there on Sundays. It's a jazz room with Tim Ingalls. Remember Tim?
Oh, I played with Tim. I would play weddings with. That was the other thing. The way when I actually started like playing to where I was like going, hey, I could do this for a living. I would play in original bands, which weirdly enough, you could play in a club in Boston. And it was always, for the door, but they would, charge at the door. You'd play the whole night. There was none of this like 4 bands, on one stage. You'd play the whole night, either all original or original and covers or whatever, and get paid. Mm-hmm. You could make money. Mm-hmm. And, but often on the weekends, you'd play what we referred to as GB, which stood for general business, which every region of the country has like a different name. Like in L.A., they call them casuals. In New York, I forget what they're called, but it's something else. But it's basically you're playing weddings. You're playing parties. Yeah. And I used to play weddings with Tim, and he was great. Yeah. And he was another one. He's since passed, I think, too. But he was fantastic. Yeah.
I love that guy.
Yeah, and he was a real character, too. Yeah. He was a nice guy.
Yes. Used to pick me up every Sunday. I throw my drums in the back of his car. We drive up to the vineyard.
Well, what? Oh, but it was a jazz gig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much straight ahead. So, did you go anyplace else from Boston before you came to Nashville?
I did. I kind of felt like I sort of hit a wall in Boston. I figured, well, okay, I want to try something different. And I moved to LA for a couple of years. I knew people that had moved out there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this was like 83, 84, kind of at the height of hair metal. Mm-hmm. And for me, and this gets back to, because I was a fan of all kinds of music before I played, I'm just not one of those guys that like grew up playing like metal or blues or jazz or whatever. I sort of tried to play everything as well as I could. I was, jack of all trades, master of a little bit, of some of it. So I went out there and I was kind of up for anything. And I knew, a few people out there. So I didn't, I looked up, Vinny, and I hadn't been there like 2 weeks. And that was at the point where he'd already done his residency with Frank Zappa. Mm-hmm. And he was playing with Joni Mitchell. And it was a little surreal, but, he says, oh, yeah, I'm playing it, doing this taping of a Joni Mitchell this thing for HBO. Yeah, come down to the movie set and see it. And it was done on like a sound stage with just like, maybe 100 people there. So that would kind of seem like there was an audience. Mm-hmm. But they would, and it was, the band at that time was her then, I think they were married at that time, Larry Klein, the bass player, Russell Ferrante, keyboards, Mike Landau was playing guitar. That was the band, and Vinny was playing drums. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was just like weird. It was surreal because there's hardly anybody there because of the nature of what it was. It wasn't actually a concert. Like they would play a song and then, okay, let's play it again. And it actually never aired on HBO. It just I don't know what happened, but they ended up being released, like on video, like you can find it. It's called Wild Things Run Fast. It was like that period. Yeah. And, but, after it's over, just all these, it was so weird for me. Johnny Guerin, who in the 60s and 70s was a famous studio drummer, jazz drummer, who he was in this section called the LA Express. Remember that? It was Tom Scott. Mm-hmm. And they did a whole couple years of touring with Joni, and he and Joni were not. He shows up, and this trumpet player, Sal Marquez, who used to play with Zapp, just all these people who I knew who they were.
Mm-hmm.
It was just weird. But anyway, so I get to L.A., and at the time, I was like 25 or 26, where I'd see some ad in, the Music Connection or whatever, the Recycler or whatever the local rag was that you try to find like an audition for some band.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing they'd ask you is, well, how old are you? And I'd say 25. You're too old. So that's sort of hit me. And I would, and at the time, painfully not anymore, but I was like 35 and still getting carded. I mean, I just looked like a little kid kind of forever. So that was sort of weird. That was kind of an interesting, but I worked. I mean, it was, I really scuffled, but I made a living playing. Like I subbed a little bit for Greg Bissonette. He would, because he was definitely moving up the ladder. And so, but he still did at the time, he still did like top 40 gigs in clubs around. And I was just kind of getting to the point where I would hear about like open auditions for things, which back in those days, you could hear, they would do like a cattle call for some artist or band or something. And lo and behold, a couple of years go by, and a bass player that I'd worked with a bunch in Boston, like the earliest bands I was ever in, he was in them. And he said, hey, I'm starting a band with this guy who I knew, John Antonopoulos, who people might know him as Johnny A. He's got a career now doing like instrumental guitar records.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And at the time he said he was putting this band together, and they sent me like a tape, and it was great. I mean, it was like at the time, the whole, Heartland rock, Mellencamp thing was sort of a new thing, but, that's what they were doing. And it was a tough decision, but I said, yeah, because I've always kind of felt I was more of a band guy than, a gun for hire, at that time anyway. And, so I moved back to Boston, and, after pretty much, just a very few months, I said, I don't know if we're going to get signed. I knew. Yeah, I went back to join that band.
Oh, they were in Boston.
Yeah, they were. Okay. So I moved back to Boston, and I knew pretty much within a few months we're never going to get it signed. So I stayed in Boston for a couple of years, and just did played in bands and played weddings on weekends and stuff, and and then I ended up moving to Nashville.
Why?
I knew before I had left Boston for L.A., I had met a keyboard player named Phil Madeira, who I know you've interviewed on this show. And at the time, he was, I thought he was going to move to L.A. to kind of pursue like a Christian music career, but he ended up moving to Nashville when I moved to L.A., and we always stayed in touch. And then even when I went back to Boston, and he was getting ready to do his first record on a small Christian label, and I came down to Nashville to play on it one summer. It was the summer before I moved here, and I thought, no, I could live here. And I have to say the two big motivating factors were there was a lot of work for musicians in Nashville, and I could afford to buy a house. Because in Boston, even then, even in the 80s, it was just the real estate prices were just like unbelievable. It's like the San Francisco of the East. So, you could, move to Nashville, buy a house for well under $100,000. And if you made like $30,000 or $40,000 in a year, I mean, you could live like a prince. Yeah. So those days are gone, but
gone, long gone.
Yeah.
In most cities around this country.
Sure.
How did you meet Phil?
That was a weird one. There was an artist. It's funny. I don't meet that many people that remember, but there was a guy named, a singer-songwriter named Andy Pratt, who I think it was 1973, he released a record on Columbia, and he had a hit single. It was this song called Avenging Annie. And he, his career, I mean, those were the days when even if you didn't sell a ton of records, you could still make 5 records before you'd get dropped. Mm-hmm. And he, his career just kind of never really took off. And Andy became a Christian. And when he wanted to do his first tour as a Christian, he wanted only Christian musicians in his band. And, things were kind of different at that time. I mean, your pool was a little limited in who you would, but Phil was the keyboard player. And I had a practice space at a warehouse in Somerville, and I would commute, by train from, I think at the time I was living right near Boston College. So that's like Newton. These are like Boston suburbs. Yeah. So it's like metropolitan Boston area. So anyway, but where I was living, I couldn't play drums, so I had to like have a rehearsal space there. So, and I was literally right above, my room was above where Andy was rehearsing his band. So I'd just be practicing, and one day Phil just kind of wandered up to where I was and introduced himself, and we became friends, and we used to he lived in Rhode Island, which was back then Providence. Commutable. Providence area. So I would, drive to his place and bring my drums, and we'd jam, and he'd write songs, and, cool. We'd just play.
Were you a Christian then?
I was, yeah.
When did you become a believer? I guess I could say I got saved when I was like 19 or 20, but I didn't really, it was over the course of many years before I really like acted on it and, got serious about it. Tell us that story at 19.
Well, it was
the situation.
I was in my hometown, but I wasn't living with my folks. I was just sort of around, and I went to like a year of school at the University of Toledo, just for basic liberal arts kind of stuff. Because I just had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't have I didn't know if I was going to be a musician or and I could sort of barely play. I was like a hobbyist at the time, and in those days, your things obviously are changing now. The concept of, well, you're not going to be anything in life if you don't go to college for 4 years.
Were you studying history there too?
At that point, it wasn't a major, but it was just basic liberal arts. So I was, English, philosophy, all the useless, stuff. But, and there was a guy in the music department, this guy who was a piano major named Marty Freimer, a Jewish guy. And I'm Jewish myself. Mm-hmm. And Marty came from a fairly, they weren't Orthodox, but like a fairly serious Jewish family, like parents, doctors, the whole cultural thing. And he had become a Christian, which, if you're Jewish, it's kind of a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's because it's like you could kind of almost do anything, but if you become a Christian, that's like often the straw that will like kind of break the camel's back for a lot of Jewish families. So, anyway, I just was like kind of crashing in people's houses and just being sort of a nomad. And I was in sort of a down period, and he said he was always witnessing to me and talking about, revelation and all kinds of things. He was an interesting character. And he said, and he would always bug me. And he said, just pray this prayer with me. And I honestly can say I basically said, okay, fine, just to shut him up. But, and my life, I prayed, for Christ to enter my life, and that he did.
Cool.
But it was quite a while and over periods of different times where, depending on like how much I would live the life of a Christian, not like I was like Caligula or anything, but I just it's a story we've all seen before.
Yeah. What was it? What was the aha moment where you went, okay, things have got to change?
I don't really think there's like one aha moment. I think it's just, there would be certain times when I would be diligent and consistent in, study, prayer, those types of things. And then I would just sort of not be. Mm-hmm. But so I think it's just over. I can look back on it and go, well, I wish I'd done things differently, and I'd been consistently more consistent, but I just wasn't. So I can't honestly say there was like something that happened, and there wasn't like a tragedy or something, or okay, now I'm going to, pull up my bootstraps and get serious.
'Cause I can.
Yeah, it was more of an accumulative thing.
Yeah. So was that an attraction for you when you moved to Nashville?
Yes and no. When I first moved here, I was introduced to the Christian music community because Phil was pretty well entrenched in it. I just, he would take me to parties and introduce me to people, and we went to church together, and, I did more. I worked in that world in addition to other things. And I was very fortunate. I worked like the first week I was here. I was really, really, because of Phil. I was very fortunate. And I wouldn't say it wasn't an attraction, but the thing that I noticed pretty quickly was how cultural Christianity is in the South. And I don't necessarily see that as being a good thing. Mm-hmm. Like, and it literally got to the point, and I have to say, and I'm not, not to, demean Christian music, but I as an industry, but some of the creepier things I'd seen in the music business, or I would put it this way, the Christian music world was no less creepy than the secular music world. I'll just put it that way. And so somebody would come up to me and go, "Oh, I'm a Christian," and I would just basically, "Oh, well, that's nice."
Yeah, good for you.
And I would kind of, I didn't, just because somebody told me they were a Christian, it just didn't mean that much to me.
Yeah.
In the sense that, well, okay, let's, let's see.
You're right.
And I don't mean that like, oh, I'm being super judgmental. I just went, well, because in the South, everybody is. Mm-hmm. Where
born a Christian.
Yeah. Where if you were, it was just what you did. You went to church on Sunday. And actually, I was actually telling this to a friend of mine recently. When I first moved here, I was living at Phil's house, and, there was no place for me to play drums, but, I knew I would be playing gigs where I'd have to like learn material, and I wanted to audition for stuff. So I needed a place to practice. And I met a songwriter who had, a fairly successful songwriter who owned a home, and he had this thing he called the chicken coop, but it was like it wasn't a shed. It was like a building that had heat and, no plumbing or anything, but it was like a insulated building. Mm-hmm. And, but it was kind of, it needed some things to be done on it. And he said, well, he let me set up my drums there and practice. And it was kind of a rehearsal facility for him and things he was doing. And I put my drums in there, and did some work on the plywood caulk things or drywall things for him in there, in exchange, and pay him rent a little bit too. But anyway, he was a Unitarian, but a very grew up. I think he's from Texas, or I'm not sure where he was from, but very Southern. And I just always remember, sometimes on a Sunday, if I'd be there like practicing, in the afternoon, I'd see like the whole family. He had like 4 or 5 kids, and they'd be all dressed up in their Sunday go to church stuff. And, they went to the Unitarian church, and, which is, as we all know, it's just Unitarians basically think, every road leads to God. So, but it was just the cultural thing. It's just, well, whatever you were, you went to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
I mean, the devil worshippers probably went to church on Sunday. I don't know.
They were at church on Sunday night.
Sunday night, yeah, you had to do it. And they wore all black. I don't know. But, I just, the whole point just being, it was interesting. Coming from Boston, it was very unusual I'd never lived anywhere where Christianity was so cultural. Like, I'd been to New York. I'd lived in LA. And there was obviously a big Christian community in LA. But but in Boston, it's like, if you're going to like say you're a Christian, it's like you're apt to get, potentially ridiculed or whatever,
So who did you work with? Who have you worked with here in Nashville from your time coming here up to the present?
Well, when I first got here, I think that gig that I did the first week, there was like a double bill at the Bluebird, and I played with Phil doing his stuff and Ashley Cleveland, and it was like the same band, played with both of them. And she was like, hadn't become, air quotes Ashley Cleveland, but I mean, everybody kind of knew who she was. She was a great singer, and everybody figured she was eventually going to do something. And I was just, trying to played with a couple of blues bands, and there was a drummer who tragically, early in his life, just a couple of years ago, a drummer named Tommy Wells, who passed away very unexpectedly. He, I went to go. He used to play with Jimmy Hall and the Prisoners of Love, and I went to go see him play a few times, and he was like great to me. I mean, he said, "Okay, I'm going to take you to breakfast, and I'm going to show you the ropes in Nashville." Cool. And because he'd been here since the 70s, and was a fairly successful studio drummer. He'd worked a lot, and he got me my first audition for like a good gig with an artist, and it was a guy named Tom Kimmel, who was, and Nashville was very, very different back then. It was like if you were not country, it was just not the eclectic, accommodating town to other kinds of music that it is now. So Tom had signed to Polygram Records, and he was kind of one of the first like big rock, like to get a big rock record deal out of Nashville. And he was sort of in between, like, say, a Bryan Adams and a Mellencamp, kind of a little more down home than Bryan Adams, but still sophisticated, not as rootsy as Sam Mellencamp. Okay. But anyway, Tommy had played with him around town to the point to where Tom Kimmel got signed, but Tommy didn't get to play on the record. Everybody else in the band did, which that's just a thing that happens. We've all experienced it, been on both sides of it. And so he just didn't want to do the tour. And this was going to be the tour that coincided the release of his record. So I auditioned, I got the gig, and we opened up for Heart for like 4 months. And that was like a really eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah. In what way?
Well, I mean, by that point, I'm like, I move here, I'm like 29. So, which, you know, I always feel like in my life, I've done everything like 10 years too late. I started playing 10 years too late. Everywhere I move 10 years too late. I'm just whatever. So I'm here. And even then, I mean, even though I still looked youthful, I mean, it's just, you know, by that point, you know, often people have said, well, I'm going to go do something else if you're not successful. And I was, you know, riddled. I've always been a self-doubter anyway. And I just thought, well, maybe there's just something about guys that have good gigs, some undefinable thing that I just don't get. And or whatever it is, I don't have it. So I get this gig and we're opening up for her. It's like the very beginning of the tour. And the thing I realized was when you're playing in a venue like on that level, it was the easiest gig I ever did in my life. It was like unbelievable. I went, oh, now I get it. And because we had their monitor guy who was amazing. And this is kind of pre the in-ear days. This is, you know, old school. And I had my monitors were 2 side fills on either side of me.
Wow. That
were like as big as me.
Yeah. With
a fantastic monitor guy. So it's like, oh, this sounds like unbelievable. Number one.
Yeah.
And when you've got all these lights on you, I mean, the first place I played, I think it was like in Maine, you know, in a place that held 15,000 people. You know, you can't see anything.
Right.
So you couldn't see them. So there was kind of nothing. Like if I would play like at the Bluebird or some little club where people are like 2 feet away from me, that was much more scary to me than this.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of a dream. It was like great. And I was like nervous. I remembered it was like the very first note I played. And then after like about a minute, I went, wow, this is like unbelievable. And it was like easy. So and I got to, you know, kind of I learned a lot watching Heart's drummer. And this was kind of that period, not their 70s kind of proggy period, but this was like the 80s when they had their big comeback, their resurgence. And Denny Carmassi was playing drums.
Yeah. He's a good drummer.
Yeah, really good drummer. But it was really interesting for me to he didn't play a lot of twiddly. He didn't play ghost notes. He didn't even really play his hi-hat with his left foot. It was very, I would watch him. I would be like right behind him and watch him play. And I'm going, wow, he's just playing so simply. But when I would go out front and see it, I went, oh, okay, I get it. That's what works. You know,
especially in those big rooms.
Yeah, he made the most out of, you know, what he did. And it just like totally worked. And he had like, you know, immaculate time.
Yeah.
And it was great. His feel was great.
And you did that gig for 4 months?
For 4 months. And came back and, you know, did some other gigs, you know, at the same time. I was in a couple of bands that got signed and didn't go anywhere. And,
were they Christian bands or
no?
Just regular?
Yeah, just regular.
Were they rock bands?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was kind of
here in Nashville.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah. And then did a lot of demos for Tom's record, but that was like another one of those things where his producer, he had a lot of different producers courting him for his second record, but the producer used everybody in the band but me. And so at that point, and then Tom, you know, that record never came out and he got dropped and, you know, everybody moved on.
Who were you just recently working with, like last year?
Oh, I toured for a couple of years with Tanya Tucker.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was.
And it's Tanya, folks.
Not Tanya.
Not Tanya.
Yeah, she'll let you know. I learned that the first day.
And so on a regular basis, what do you do as a musician drummer around here?
I mean, I do anything and everything. I'll do, you know, I do gigs, I do, you know, sessions, and about 10 years ago, it's kind of probably a little bit too long of a story about how I got into it, but 10 years ago, I started composing music for TV and film mostly via music libraries. And that's been, a big focus. I mean, it's turned into, it was always kind of a sideline, something I did in addition to just playing a lot, but it's become more of a focus.
Okay.
In my, adapting to the ever-changing music business. And when I moved to Nashville, there just, frankly, there just weren't a lot of good drummers. And, it was like, and now it's just like everybody lives here.
Right.
So it's much more competitive. And I mean, I'm glad I have, I always hire myself to play on my music. So
that's good.
But,
be your own boss and your own.
Well, you just have to, kind of go with I'm not, there's certain things that I probably should have adapted to, but, that's one big thing. And in the 90s, mid 90s or so, during all the unplugged craze, that was another big thing for me was I got a gig with an artist, auditioned on drums, but when she got the tour as an opening act for Dan Fogelberg, he was going to do the tour unplugged. And so his opening act wasn't allowed to be unplugged. So what happened was, it was kind of funny. She gets out, she called me up and she said, "Oh, love your playing. I really want you to do the gig, but I'm not allowed to have a drummer." So, and I went, "Well, I know it's not your fault, whatever." So she gets out there. I think they started in Vegas, and she shows up, and Fogelberg's got like a whole big rock band. Really? Joe Vitale. I mean, and so she, I think it's something women can do. She, batted her eyes and said, "Well, can't I at least have a percussionist?" Yeah. So she said, "Well, do you want to do the gig as a percussionist?" And, me kind of wanting the gig, and I never considered myself a percussionist, but I said, "Sure." So that's when I got real serious. I learned how to play congas, and, I wanted to get, I didn't want to be one of those drummers that, played congas like a drummer. I wanted to learn how to play them. So, so that's when I started, acquiring percussion instruments. And so that was a big thing. That, and then, when I kind of morphed into a composer as well as a player, that was like a big turning point for me.
So tell us about your social media outlets. Where can we hear your stuff, your music, your website?
Yeah, I have a website for me, which I don't have a counter on it, so I don't know who goes there. But anyway, but if you want to hear what I do as a composer and a player, I have two separate pages. My composing page, which is bigger, there's like maybe 40 tracks up there. That's all stuff I wrote either by myself or with other people. On SoundCloud. They're both on SoundCloud. And then I have more of a playing resume on SoundCloud as well. So if you put in my name, you got to spell it right. And they should both come up. And they both have like short bios that, they can, show you the highlights. I've had, some pieces in movies and TV shows and stuff. The highlighted, some of the things that are kind of more interesting.
That's cool. All right. So tell the folks how to spell your name.
It's Radovsky. You can put in Mike or Michael, either one.
Yeah,
and it should come up. I think I might be the only Radovsky on SoundCloud, but
could be the only Radovsky in Tennessee.
Probably, yeah. Well, actually, I know that for a fact that I am. So, at least with that spelling. So, yeah.
So, you got anything coming up like this week, or anything you're looking forward to?
Oh, well, actually, when I leave here, I have to another one of my TV film things. I'm mixing finishing mixing a couple of tracks that I did with somebody that I guess was on the show last week, Rico Thomas.
Yeah.
Some stuff we cooked up actually a while back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pitching those to some libraries. They're full songs, though. They're not instrumental beds. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the music libraries now have like labels under their umbrella where they, want full songs.
Lyrics or just instrumental?
No, full lyrics, the whole 9 songs.
Wow.
So.
Wow. So who's writing the lyrics? You and Rico both?
Yeah, Rico wrote these. He sort of came over to my place and we kind of came up with some riffs, and he's gone so much, but he'll write a lot on the road. Mm-hmm. And I have written some lyrics. Like I got into the composing thing, stemming from there was a company in town that they would hire me to play on their commercials. Mm-hmm. And at some point they let me start writing, and some of the commercials I would write for them required lyrical content. So.
Hey, man, that's great. And as our time comes to an end here, I want to thank you for being on the show.
It was fun.
It's always fun hanging with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Check him out, folks. Michael Radovsky. Thanks to Mike. Thanks to all of our supporters out there. Peace and love. Bye, bye, bye.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al DiMeola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.